Welcome inside an Odyssey original podcast, also in tandem with WFAN in New York. Joining us is a guy that made multiple Pro Bowls at multiple positions along the defensive line for the New York Jets and recently coined a Pro Football Hall of Famer. Really excited about our conversation with Joe Klecko. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Now we have this buzz going on. Great to have that HOF next to your name.
How does it feel to hear the title in the introduction, Joe Klecko, Pro Football Hall of Famer?
You know, it's sinking in more and more. I was sitting talking to a friend of mine in his office one day, and he's been my buddy since about 40 years now. And he said to me, he goes, you've got to learn to think like you belong. And, after waiting 30-some years, it's sinking in. The awards banquet last week before the Super Bowl started it, and then all the hoopla out there. And then I believe that, the cherry on the top will be the time in Canton, though. But it's still sinking in. It's not there yet totally. After all this wait, it's a dream come true.
If we went back to the beginning, your roots in Chester, PA, this is a town much like so many around America where before World War II, manufacturing, lots of jobs, and then post-war, jobs start departing, manufacturing starts leaving, and there's going to be a hard scrabble life there. Does growing up in Chester, PA, with those as your backdrop, does that inform how your work ethic was developed and you kind of being maybe an underdog that had to fight your way to the top?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with it. Reason being is because, I worked almost all the time since I was 12 years old. My uncle had owned a heating and air business and oil and cleaning heaters, and I used to get stuck in them big old heaters with my cousin, and I would be cleaning heaters and delivering oil in the winter. And, I did that for many years and got into construction and, I used to drive trucks and operate equipment. And, I was destined to be that from being from Chester, as you explained, a working class, neighborhood. And, I never thought about going to college. Never ever thought about playing pro football because, in my young days, pop order didn't even exist. It was local schools, some high schools, some grade schools had football. I mean, high school did, but there was not many young places for us, to play football. So baseball was the sport in them days, and I was pretty good at that. But football wasn't even a thought process.
Was football a way out? I mean, in terms of all those blue-collar jobs that you had growing up, was there something that said, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life? Or would you have been okay being an HVAC repairman or any of those other jobs that you talked about, and it just so happened that, hey, football was a path?
The after there, because, I never said, oh, this is a way out. I didn't look at it like that. I thought I would, until like my junior or senior year in college, where there, scouts were starting to look. I thought I was always going to be that guy to go home and get back to work and settle down to a normal family life and in a neighborhood that had the working class ethic. I always thought I'd be that. I never looked at it as football being a way out because even when I was drafted in the pro football, the salaries in them days, actually, when I came home my first year with the New York Jets, I worked for a company called Robbins Motor Transportation, and I went in and I had a load waiting for me to go the day I came back from the last game we played.
Wow, is that right? You were still doing those jobs even when you came home with a paycheck from the NFL?
Paycheck from the NFL. I was a sixth-round draft choice. I made $21,000 my first year in the NFL.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Boy, that is mind-blowing. That tells you the different scale of economics going on today in the NFL. And so one of my favorite stories about you is that before you went to college, before you went to Temple, you actually played semi-professional football under an assumed name from a fake college. Was this to get a paycheck, or was this just to get your physicality out? What was the reason? What was the story? That must have been in a crazy league.
Well, it was a crazy league. It was a professional seaboard league, but the owners of the team, they realized I could play, and I was playing with ex-college players, and a couple guys actually, one played for the Bears and one played for the Eagles for a couple of years.
Wow.
And I was a kid out of high school, and they came to me and said, Joe, just in case, we're going to suggest that you play under an assumed name. So my name was Jim Jones from Holland University. That's one of fun. Yeah.
That's incredible. So you end up going to Temple University and you get drafted by the Jets in the 6th round. And before that, you go through a couple of hardships, at least emotionally, from people that you respect. There was a high school coach at the time that told you, get out of here. You're embarrassing yourself. You're too small. And then you had it out with your dad as well. You wanted your dad to come see you play, and you didn't play that day, and he kind of ripped you a new one, and that set, I'm sure, in motion a "I'll prove you wrong." That feels like a lot of humiliation to go through as a young person trying to find your way. How did it affect you?
Not, it wasn't, I didn't look at it like that. I mean, my dad, I remember that story is actually, I came home from my first game and I didn't play. And before I left, I told my dad, I said, I might have a chance to play today. And my dad was a local hero, more or less, from sports. He was a local legend in Sandlot football, more or less, the semi-pro leagues and stuff. And, when I came home that first time, he was mad at me. Wouldn't talk to me because I didn't play. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, I never realized that, how deep the feelings went to my father about this. So anyway, I went back and, I knew I could play. And what happened was that a guy got hurt in front of me, and actually he was a two-way guy. He played center and defensive tackle. He got hurt. So they put me in about the 4th game, and then, well, the rest is history. They could never take me out again.
That's pretty amazing. And so it ends up launching this incredible career for you. And, you end up getting to the New York Jets and drive yourself into becoming from a 6th rounder who clearly has no job security into a regular starter. And for all the offensive linemen that you battled, I mean, Hall of Famers like Dwight Stevenson, John Hanna, go down the list. One of the things that they always said was you never took a play off, no matter how many points you guys were down or up. You never took a play off. And you said, this is because I never wanted to lose anything, including a play. How intense was your focus to go through entire games and use those individual battles on every single play, no matter what the score was?
To me, it was easy. And it really was. I mean, that's where I think really your pride comes in. And not in the vain way I'm talking about pride. I was never that kind of self-promoter, but I didn't want anybody ever to be, like today you see guys get dominated and other players pointing at them and stuff. And, I not that happened a lot when we played, but I never wanted to be the guy that was dominated on any play. I always wanted to be the one that dominated. Like, it could have been 30-0 or 30-10, whatever it was. I didn't care. I mean, you were going to have to bring it to me all day long because that's the only way I knew how to play.
Well, you guys didn't win a lot of games early. You come into a Jets franchise that's trying to reboot after what had happened in the late 60s, early 70s, before you guys hit the playoffs again back in the early 80s. So how did you take those losses? I mean, if it was so important to win, was it hard to deal with a lot of losing?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I know, like my wife hated me at the end of the day. When I came home, I was no fun, and understandably so. I mean, I just think that if you learn to take losing, easy, it becomes easy to do. And I never, ever, ever took losing very easy. I hated it when I was in high school. I couldn't say we were a pretty good football team in high school. We won the Catholic League in Philadelphia, which was a good league, and we won it. We lost the city championship, and I don't remember. I went out with my best friend who was a defensive end, And we went out to Arby's and sat at Arby's and, sat there and ate ourselves to death after ice cream. We want to go, we don't want to talk to nobody.
What does Joe Klecko eat to eat himself to death at Arby's after a big high school loss? A lot of beef and cheddars?
It was good. Good.
So finally, the team starts turning under Walt Michaels. And in 1981, the New York Sack Exchange is kind of created and coined. Yourself, Abdul Salam, Marty Lyons, Mark Gastineau become kind of certainly a New York sensation, if not a national sensation as well. So now here's the taste of the Jets doing well, and it's happening in New York, and you're in your 20s, and you're on posters and ringing in the New York Stock Exchange. What is that moment like to think about where you started from as a sixth rounder in Chester, PA, to now in New York, and you're in the limelight?
It was really, you talk about turnaround. I mean, we started to get recognition and stuff like that, especially after the games. They always wanted to talk to us. And, that was even something different there because news coverage back then, of course, on the New York teams, we weren't doing well, was not great. But the biggest, moment of that days was when we were doing a shoot for Pro-Ked. They wanted us all to be in their shoes. We went down to the New York Stock Exchange when it closed, and we went in to do the shoot on the exchange floor. And, where all the ticker tapes are still laying all over the place and stuff, where they still had that back then.
Yeah.
So when we got on the floor, it was just unbelievable. A lot of the guys that were on the floor working stayed, and we were just convincing with all them guys and carrying on. We got out of the car. So little fix this up, and that's a rarity in itself, okay? So we get that limousine right there on Wall Street, in front of the Bull, and we get out. There is people from wall to wall on Wall Street clapping for us. I'm like, where the hell are we? It's like, this is unbelievable. And that was our real first introduction, into the limelight, if you will.
Is it tough to navigate the trappings of being young and famous in New York City in the 80s?
Oh, yeah. I mean, everywhere you go, people were tugging at you and doing things like that. But, it's just like anything else, though. If you have a perspective, whether it be, your upbringing or whatever, or, you have a grounded situation like a mother and father that, keep your feet on the ground. I don't care what it was. I may come back, from being out all night, stuff like that. And I was at home and like my mother would be watching the kids or something. And she would just, where the hell have you been? Like or grounded, and I was married too. I mean, it's not like mom was, but still that's how we grew up. And, it was to answer to, the hires to be, if you will. But, there was an ethics inside of you that kept you grounded.
So I wonder how you might have clashed with Mark Gastineau, because Mark was so flashy, so flamboyant, he was so showy, and you were so understated. You went about your jobs differently, but you were on the same defensive line. Did it bother you that he acted like that, and did it cause any tension between you two?
Yeah, when we played, there was always that tension between us because, again, he was flamboyant and I was not. I told my son Danny that one day. When Danny got in the NFL, and he has a defensive lineman, and he got drafted by the Patriots. And, I told him in college, and he was real good in college, and I said to him, I says, if you ever choose to celebrate after sacking a quarterback, hurry up and turn around, because the first person you're going to see kicking your ass is going to be me. So, Mark and I were very quite the opposites, and there was tension at times. But the one thing I knew was, to get to where we wanted to get, him and I had to be good. And we were good. And we did succeed in doing good. So it made us win. And that was one thing that I was gracious of. That, that was our first year that after him and Marty came in the draft process, that was the first year. The next year we went to the playoff.
You guys were connected, obviously, by the poster, connected by the nickname, the New York Sack Exchange. Did you four hang out socially, or did you hang out and do the things that you're talking about with other people on the team?
No. Mark Marty and I were together a lot, and Abdul was a quiet source, so he was very, very rarely out. But no, Mark was in a different crowd than we were.
Yeah, Mark was in a crowd, I'm sure, that was a little Hollywood, a little faster, and maybe a little showier than probably you and Marty Lyons that are going to throw back a few beers at a dive bar in Queens somewhere.
That'd be more like it, exactly.
So 81, you make the playoffs, but unfortunately you're beaten in the postseason by the Buffalo Bills. The next year in 1982 is a big run for you guys. Even though it's a strike-shortened season, you finish 6-3, make the playoffs. It's kind of a larger expanded postseason because of a strike-shortened year, but you guys win multiple games in the postseason. Going into the 82 playoffs, did you have any momentum, any rhythm, considering how short the regular season was, or was it like starting over an entire season again with the way the playoffs were set up?
Well, I think that the one thing I talk about was our youth, and I believe that the year before we started by going to the Buffalo, our first playoff game, and we were doing things. And then after that, it was like all we had to do was play hard. I don't think we really distinguished ourselves as the in-depth knowledge as you would have today about momentum and so forth as far as going into the playoff. We played hard. We played hard every week, offensively and defensively. And we had two very good things I think that you need to play in a league is the offensive and defensive line. Our offensive line was fantastic. Our defensive line was fantastic. And those are the two denominators I believe that you can build championships around. And then we had great talent. I mean, we had Freeman McNeil, Wesley Walker, Johnny Lamb Jones for speed. And, of course, we had the sack exchange and some pretty good linebackers on our side. So, we knew as long as we played hard, and we did that, against Cincinnati, against the Raiders. Lance Mel showed himself up, by interceptions, by linebackers, and we put some pressure on him too. But I think it was not as much as the build-up as we just kept to our game plan of play hard. And that's what we did. Everybody gave their all the time.
That postseason that you bring up, you guys beat the Bengals in the wild card round. In the divisional round, you go to Los Angeles to take on the Raiders. It is a crazy game. It seems like you guys have this game wrapped up multiple times, and every time the Raiders wriggle away and there's a chance. I want to play for you a clip right now via NFL Films to relive the end of that game. Here it is. What memories does that bring back?
But that's it. Just as I said, though, that's the young bunch of guys that just accomplished a great feat, And the one thing we were together. We were always battling, especially going against the Raiders, Puckett, Marcus Allen, here's a team with some history behind it. And, we're going against the immovable object, and we came out on top. It was a tremendous feeling. Like I said, Lance, we owe Lance a lot for that game.
He had huge plays down the stretch, a pair of interceptions to seal it, and you guys are ending up in the AFC Championship game. Then we hit the AFC title game of the Orange Bowl in Miami against Don Shula's Miami Dolphins, and there's a huge rainstorm the night before. You guys show up to the OB the next morning for this game, and the tarp has been left off the field, and there's puddles of water everywhere. And the conspiracy theory that exists 40-some-odd years later that even my uncle brings up at Thanksgiving almost every year is Don Shula meant to do that to prevent Freeman McNeil from cutting back. Do you think that Shula had sabotage on his mind that day?
I really don't, because, well, first of all, they did make it a rule, though, after that game, that during playoff games, if there were any inclement weather to be, that the fields were to be tarped. And that rule didn't exist before that game. And then, I don't even know if anybody ever tarped the field before that game. I don't know if that was a situation that comes up in the NFL. Natural grass was the way to go a lot back then. There was a few turf fields and all, but a lot of guys who had the natural grass. Let's think about it. You think Cleveland, there was the worst you played on painted dirt there, but in Miami at least they had grass, and they had fields that were made to drain better and not hold water. But I don't think there was ever a rule about tarping the field until that game.
That day, your offense could not do anything, and unfortunately, quarterback Richard Todd threw 5 interceptions, 3 to A.J. Dewey. It seals the win for the Dolphins. They go to the Super Bowl. That was the only AFC Championship game you would play in. Does it hurt today to think you came that close, but you couldn't get over the hump to the Super Bowl?
Well, I wouldn't say it hurts, but disappointing without a doubt. Because we're thinking, here we are climbing that ladder. First year against Buffalo, the playoffs, first game. Then we go to the AFC Championship game. Okay, now we're going to go to next year. We'll be back. It didn't work out like that, So, the fine line between making the playoffs, not making the playoffs, and then going that far in the playoffs is so thin in the NFL that, we didn't realize how tough it would be to get back again.
Was there resentment towards Richard Todd from the defense or the rest of the team because he had such an awful day on that big stage?
Absolutely not. One thing Richard was a competitor. And I'll just give you a little instance about Richard Todd, what a great guy he was. When Richard, he didn't want to go out on Friday nights and stuff, Richard would take my son, Michael, my oldest son, and he would go to Richard's apartment with him, and they'd watch a movie.
Wow.
Yeah, Richard was a much better guy than he's ever been, exploited as, especially because of the loss. I mean, he did make AJ do a lot of money, but it's not that. Do we blame him for it? No, absolutely not. If it wasn't for Richard, we're not there. I mean, the year before in the Buffalo game, we're down 3 touchdowns, and the opening kickoff, Bruce Harper fumbles it and gives them a touchdown. And who brings us back? Richard Todd brought us back. I mean, he threw an interception in the end zone to Simpson in the latter part of the fourth quarter. But if it wasn't for him, we're not even there. And the same thing through that strike short year. I mean, Richard was the reason that we got to where we were. Bad in our running game, but it was nothing to be yell about Richard.
Was he handed? You would have an up close and personal account of this. Was he handed a tough deck of cards, considering he was the next after Joe Namath, and you could never really rise to the Namath celebrity or success, and because of that, maybe it was an unfair criticism that he kind of naturally got right from the start?
Yeah, absolutely. Alabama, Jets. I mean, Richard had a tough road all the way,
Yeah.
They both came from Alabama. They both wound up with the Jets. And then, of course, Joe made history with what he did. And, of course, Joe became an icon, not only in the Jets, in the AFL, he became an icon in professional football. And for Richard to follow that up, it was very hard for Richard, I think, because the media would bring it up in the very beginning a lot. But listen, I believe Richard had a pretty good career. I believe that in the end, he got shortchanged by Joe Walton. I don't think he should have ever got traded. But, they looked at Kenny O'Brien coming in as being the next savior with that draft with Marino and Elway and Easton and all. So I think Richard looked like he would be moved over. So, but I think he took a short stick by having to follow Joe. Yes.
You considered Walt Michaels, your head coach at the time, to be a father figure, and then he abruptly resigned to the end of the 82 season. This is when you guys are coming off the AFC Championship game. That obviously throws everything into a tumultuous situation, but he's dealing with his mother, who's terminally ill at the end of the season. Were you guys aware that he was dealing with that and that it was draining on him so much that he was considering retirement and ultimately would?
No, absolutely not. And you could see there was a lot bothering him at the end of the season. Even when he went to say goodbye to it, he didn't even address the team, at the end of that day. The general manager did, Jimmy Kensel, and nobody knew that. Nobody knew that until later, a lot of years later, that we knew that. Walt reminded me of my dad a lot because, like you had mentioned earlier about my high school career, my dad got mad at me for not playing. Well, Walt was the kind of guy that was you were there to do your job. And if you did your job and did it well, that's what you got paid to do. And so if you weren't given the pat on the back all the time, a lot of people didn't like that about Walt because, a lot of people love to be patted on the back. I was used to that. I was used to getting my butt kicked where I didn't miss one play or two plays. So Walt and I got along very well because of, and again, he was a Pollock and so was I. So, that brought us deeper. Yeah.
Speaking of your Polish background, was your last name Klecko changed when it came over here? Your family came over?
Oh, it's spelled exactly like it is, but it's an asterisk over the O, and it's Klecko is how it's pronounced in Polish. But no, that's how it was when my grandparents came here. That's how the name was spelled in Poland. But the Polish, there's certain things in spelling that change it a little bit.
Yeah,
and it was Klecko.
Those years you were playing at Shea Stadium, a couple of years later, you would end up being tenants at Giant Stadium, playing football in a baseball ballpark, but at least it was your own. What was the experience like playing football at Old Shea?
It was a big advantage to us in a way because, the one thing everybody always talked about at Shea was the Jets coming in for a landing,
Yeah, it was loud.
Yeah, you can look above the stadium. They felt like they were on top of you,
Yeah.
And I remember one of the field goal kickers, I was talking to someone at a Pro Bowl one time, and he was telling me about our kicker actually got scared. Like when the Jet showed up and got to kick the ball, he goes, he shanked the ball, and it was because of the Jet that actually showed up. We didn't call it Marty and tell him about apply now, but it actually shook him up. The boy, he shanked the kick. It really did. So teams didn't like playing at Shea. They didn't.
No. I remember being there as a kid to watch Mets games, and it felt like those planes were so loud it would ring your ears, and it was almost scary, like you said, because they would come in so low to LaGuardia. When you move to Giant Stadium, you lose the aspect of having your own stadium, but you go into a, quote, football facility. Was it better from that standpoint or worse because it wasn't your own?
I don't think anybody looked at it like that. I mean, listen, we play 8 other games on the road at 8 other stadiums. They're not your own. If you want to look at it like some guy looked at his playing 16 away games, whatever, But I don't think it affected us in any way.
1986, you guys begin the season 10-1, and there are dreams of a New York Super Bowl because the Giants are on their run as well. Ultimately, the end of the season, you guys lose 5 games in a row. You'll still make the playoffs, but you finish at 10-6. What happened in the final month plus that didn't happen earlier in the season?
Lance Mellon, I got hurt.
And
I had my knee injury, and I was out for the season. And Lance Mellon got his knee hurt, and he was out for the season. But we didn't win another game.
And that must have crushed you to miss the postseason in one of the rare appearances in a couple of years that you had made the playoffs again.
Oh, without a doubt. When they went to Cleveland and they lost in Cleveland, there was a couple of stupid penalties we lost on the game, and it really was, it was heartfelt that we were involved, in the game, but to lose it the way we did, because we were a good football team, and that was the end of the road more or less.
Yeah, 10-point lead in Cleveland in the fourth quarter, but Gastineau takes a bad pass, roughing the passer penalty, and then ultimately the Browns come back to win. For you guys, it was good teams, never great teams under Joe Walton. It wasn't what it was under Walt Michaels. Was it less satisfying playing under Coach Walton than it was for Walt since you were so close to Walt?
Well, for me, it was a big difference, without a doubt. One of the things that Joe Walton's wife tried to do is they brought all the wives in one day and had them sit in our lockers in the locker room, and they wanted to teach our wives a fight song.
Oh boy!
Well, my wife and Joe Fields' wife got up and just walked out. Going, this is just too much. And it was like, I don't think Joe ever wanted to treat us like men. And, that's the way Walt treated us. And I think that was a big downfall.
What's the connection like between Jets fans, Jets players from that era?
Oh, there's a kinship, no doubt. Reason being is because I believe the name that the Sack Exchange created, made history. And if you really think about it, you think about Purple People Eaters of Fearsome Foursome. The New York Sack Exchange is right there with them as part of his names. Remus and I were talking about it on one of the podcasts we were doing out at the Super Bowl, and he and I probably are connected to two of the coolest names ever. Revis Island, New York Sack Exchange. What two great names to be connected to you over history, and that they've made the test of time without a doubt. And I think the reason why there's a connection to the fans for that reason.
The only defensive player in NFL history that made a Pro Bowl at 3 different positions, which is an amazing accomplishment. But you were out of the game for 35 years, had been retired without going to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Then finally you get that knock at the door. After 35 years, had you given up the dream that would ultimately happen, or did you keep the faith?
Oh no, oh no. I mean, until they put me in the grave, I was going to keep that dream alive in my heart. Oh no, every year, because, I had the conversations with a lot of the voters year in and year out. In the very beginning, it was Paul Zimmerman, God rest his soul.
Dr. Z.
Always a tremendous advocate of mine in the room. And Joe Horrigan told me at one point that Joe DeLamalore had given such a wonderful, acclamation to my career during one of the voting processes that I almost made it back in the current day player time. But then it didn't happen. And over the time with the seniors, I was always, Joe, with one more vote we had it. Joe, I think we're going to make it. But then finally, when Gary Myers, called me about it, and he said, Joe, you've been nominated. You made it through the senior side. Now we just have to make the final vote, on the total voting, all of the writers. And then when it did happen, when Joe came to the door, wow, you talk about exhilarating.
The video is really powerful. Even if you're not a Jets fan, that is a really powerful moment when Joe Namath comes to your door, knocks on the door, and you recognize, man, the call has come. What energy, what feeling comes over you when you recognize that?
It was all kinds of emotions, because this is what people don't understand about that video. My wife had made me stay home from work that day for a reason. And so I told them, I said, listen, let's get something to eat. I'm hungry, So my daughter was home, and they actually called my daughter about getting me to stay home. And, my daughter told, Mom can make Dad do anything, so we'll get him to stay home. So I'm there, somebody's knocking at the door, and I'm waiting for them to answer. They didn't answer it. I'm going to the door actually to look for DoorDash. I'm looking for somebody to open the door, and here Joe Namath is there. And of course, there's 18 cameras behind him, and him in his gold jacket. I know what this is.
Yeah.
So it was just, oh my Lord. And to see Joe, Joe is Joe. I don't care how you look at it. Joe is a tremendous, being alone, just by being there. And it was just so exhilarating. And I turned around to my wife and I said, hey, honey, Joe Namath came to lunch. The reason behind it, because I was actually looking for somebody to deliver food. And here Joe Namath has welcomed me to the 2023 Home of Fame. It was a moment to be, everybody talks about, your first children and all that, and they're the greatest, but you can't put it in a class. It's in a class by itself.
We know Joe likes to work, but even he's not delivering DoorDash, so you knew that it was Hall of Fame time.
Exactly. It was, the way it turned out, everything, even when we had the introduction we had the Merlin Olsen lunch they called out at the Super Bowl, when all of the Hall of Famers are there with us. The first time we got to meet like 50 of the guys, which was cool. And they introduced us on stage, and they played our knock, the clip that everybody's seen. And when the audience seen mine, it was like, it was just a roar. It was funny. So
Yeah.
it was an emotional time.
Yeah, that's incredible. One other thing about your playing career was it opened up opportunities in Hollywood as well. You were in Smokey and the Bandit 2, Cannonball Run. I mean, you had small bit parts in 4 different Burt Reynolds films. So how did that come to be?
You know, I was a truck driver in my previous life, of course, and I was noted for all big stuff all over the country. And when I came home, like I told you, from my first year, I was in a see tractor trailer the next day, and I had an article in Sport magazine on the cover of me holding up a tractor trailer, changing a tire. You know, it was a spoof, of course.
Yeah.
I really wasn't holding it up. But Bert seen that, and matter of fact, my wife and I were out one night. My mom was watching the kids, and she said to me, "Joey," she said, "Burt Reynolds called." And I said, "Yeah, Mom, did you notice the boy? Who was it or whatever?" And she said, No. And he says, the director's going to call you back tonight at midnight, and they want you to be in a movie. I said, "Yeah." So Hal Needham called me that night, and he was the director of the movie, and he asked me, and of course, I knew Dave if I was going to make a dime, and I was in the first movie I made with Burt, and then Burt and I hit it off real well, and basically, here I was. I had those bit parts. And I just want you to know, though, I was voted one of the 10 worst actors ever in intellectual sports.
I think that's unfair. I've seen all the clips. I think you did a great job. I really do. That must have been a pinch me moment when you're thinking, man, here I am from Chester, PA. I didn't even think I was going to play college ball, let alone the NFL. And now I'm in Burt Reynolds movies and Burt and I are friends. That must have been mind blowing to you.
Oh, absolutely. But the one great thing about me, to boast for a second, is I always was grounded. I never thought of myself to be. I'll tell you a very quick funny story. There was a guy in Cannonball Run by the name of George Burt. George played a big part, in it also. And he had an acting school here in New York. And I came to him and said, "George, when we go back to New York, how about we have lunch?" I had lunch with him, and because I wanted to go to his acting school maybe, And we were sitting there having lunch, and he kind of goes, "Well, Joe, you're a really good football player." I said, "Yeah." I said, "They say that." He goes, "No." He goes, "You're really good, aren't you?" Like, he goes, "What are you trying to say?" He goes, "I think maybe sticking with football would be a great idea." You got to burst my bubble.
That is funny. So how is life for you now? How's the life of Joe Klecko at this point?
Tremendous. I have 5 beautiful children, 5 beautiful grandchildren, and I have a daughter who's still not married. I have one just got married, and I told him, I said, "I want 20 grandkids. Let's go. Get to work, you guys." So no, I go to work every day, and I continue. Our family's the biggest part of our life. So my wife Debbie and I, we don't travel much or do much because we enjoy the kid. The kids are everything, and now that they're having kids, it makes it even better.
Well, you had just such an amazing career, and it's so rewarding, I'm sure, for you, obviously, to be in the Hall of Fame, but I think for Jets fans in general and New York in general, that really always appreciated the hard work that you put in. There's a lot of blue collar sentiments in New York, even for the glitz and the glamour, and you always reflected that really well. And so what a cool vindication for your career and all the things you accomplished, the type of person that you were. So congratulations, and thanks so much. I know we said this would only go maybe 20 minutes, but you've been more than generous with the time, so I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, D. I appreciate you having me on. And really, listen, New York fans, don't lose it. Let's go Jets.
There you go.